it's one of the most challenging things because the brain is meant to judge. It's what keeps us safe. But to be able to train one's brain means that I'm able to then kind of create, that's neuroplasticity, right? So we've talked about neurodiversity so far. Neuroplasticity means that my brain can shift, it changes, it evolves, which is such a beautiful thing. So this book, the Mindfulness Workbook for Beginners, is it just allows people to access how to integrate that into one's life, whether you're staying at home raising a family, a CEO running multiple companies, or one of the top athletes in your industry. This book allows for you to build that into your life so that you can live in a more peaceful, less suffering manner.
Hello, I'm John Brink, and we are podcasting on the Brink from downtown Prince George, British Columbia, Canada. And for all those people from around the world watching us, they say, oh, we know where Canada is. But in British Columbia, on the west coast, right on the Pacific Ocean. And so we know the big city there called Vancouver, right? We are 500 miles north of Vancouver, or for our friends in Europe, 800 kilometers. That puts us in the center of British Columbia, northwest, east, south. Big province. Prince George is a city of about 80,000 people, but around 120,000 in the region. We have lots of forest, lots of nature. Blackbirds, grizzlies, caribou, deer, wolf, you name it, we have it. Living in harmony with nature. And within 50 miles, we have about 100 lakes. And so it's a beautiful, beautiful area. Now you have to promise me something, Peter. Don't tell everybody, because otherwise they all want to come here. Today, we have a very, very special guest. His name is Peter Economou. And Peter has a very, very interesting background. It's on mental health and mindfulness. Dr. Peter is a certified mental performance consultant through an association of applied sports psychology. He is an active member of the state national psychology associations, serves at an editorial board for the Journal of Clinical Sports Psychology, and frequent contributor to multiple media outlets. Dr. Peter is also a best-selling author. Dr. Peter, welcome to the show.
John, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. And you did such a great job getting everybody wanting to visit the British Columbia. You have to keep it a secret.
Yeah, we'll do that for all those 10,000 people that are watching us. They're all going to get ready and say, call the travel agent. So, Peter, tell us about your background. You have a very, very interesting background, obviously. And so where are you from, and where are you now? And how did you get involved in this? Where did you get your education? And kind of take us forward. Tell us a bit about you.
Well, yeah, I'm so excited to be here. And so right now I'm on the East Coast of the United States. And so I'm right outside of New York. And that's where I was born and raised.
Okay.
And so it's sometimes they call it the armpit of America, New Jersey. But I'm very proud to be from the armpit of America. And so it's where I did a lot of my training outside of the New York area at a university called Seton Hall University.
Okay.
Listeners that are college sports fans may know about it, but that's probably about it, because we're known for our basketball team. But I trained in counseling psychology there, and what's important and what I love of what I do. So now as a licensed psychologist and a performance coach, we look at the science and the art of what it takes somebody to get to this top level. And that's
Right.
like this beautiful art, like blend of, my science brain. I'm a researcher, I'm a faculty member. And so I can take the science of how people behave, and then the art of how all of us are so unique in finding, the formula for each person to create their best sense of self and their most optimal self.
So that's your training, and are you still there now in that same location?
Yeah, I mean, when you describe British Columbia, I'm also in the middle of nature. I'm in a town that has lots of horses. So my neighbors are horses, and there's lots of animals around, so which is really beautiful and does help keep us young to kind of connect with nature.
Yeah, have you been in British Columbia? Obviously not in Prince George because that's 500 miles north of Vancouver. But my wife, myself, we have a place also on Vancouver Island, and that's where Victoria is. Lots of people know about Victoria is the capital of British Columbia, but also there it's lots of nature, lots of horses. In fact, we have a farm and we have an arena. We have 7 horses actually. Both my wife,
Wow.
myself ride English dressage. So,
Wow.
horses have always been a big part of our lives. So now from a career perspective, is that you're still very, very involved in counseling and tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so I've never been to where you are. So I've been to the West Coast many times, but never to that high up in Canada. But I've read about it and looked at pictures, and it's stunning. I know for sure.
Yeah,
And so yeah, I mean now I get to work with all different types of people. So I work a lot in the sports world, and so I work with a lot of athletes and teams in our area. The one thing about the New York region that's really unique to other parts of the world, well, it's concentrated. It's not that unique, but in being so concentrated, there's so many teams. We've got multiple football teams, multiple basketball teams, multiple
right,
colleges and universities. So there's
right.
lots of stuff that kind of goes on here, and so I'm blessed to be able to work across a lot of the different units, and it's fun too, but also in today's world we talk a lot about mental health and how it's a big piece of all of us. We really recognize how important mental health is for your both your spirit, your physical health.
And it becoming much more aware globally, really, people addressing those issues where, I'm 84, will be 84 years old in the next 2 weeks, actually. So when I grew up, the mental health was very limited. Either you were dumb or stupid, and or did not fit, or worse than that. So
Yeah.
and so that part was never even talked about or considered. And for myself, just giving you a bit of a background, I was born in Holland
Hmm.
in 1940 during the Second World War, and saw far too much that we should not have seen. And and then we were liberated by the Canadian Army April the 12th, 1945, and it made such an impression on me that I always knew from that point forward I would go to Canada and the
Hmm.
land of my heroes. And it took me until I was 23 before I did. Academically, I was not a success story, probably fitting in that category. I failed grade 3 and I failed grade 7 3 times. And so they said to my parents, "What are we going to do with this guy?" They said, maybe send him to the mentally disturbed school. They said,
Mm.
"No, we're not going to do that." So let's teach him a trade so he can work with his hands.
Hmm.
And so my grandfather was a master carpenter. My dad was in the lumber industry. So they sent me at 13 to a furniture factory,
Mm.
and then in the evenings I trained to become a furniture maker.
Mm.
It was much later actually that I always knew, why am I different than all the other individuals? And kids are hard on each other. So after you failed grade 7 3 times, the friends that I used to have went to college, university, and went on. And for me, I was doing quite well, actually, even in Holland. Then was drafted in to the Dutch Air Force for 2 years, mandatory, which was a good experience. And then, but I felt I had to start over again on my own to prove to me that I was no less than, also not better than, but there was something different about me. And
Mm.
it took me, so when I was in 1965, I decided to go to Canada with nothing. A
Mm.
suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and very little money. And I had a dream to build a lumber mill. And so I had to go then to British Columbia, so I flew into Montreal, off the plane, on the train to British Columbia, 4 days, 5 nights. Oh my God, that is a long way. And then when I arrived in Vancouver, I went to the immigration office, couldn't speak English, but fortunately there was a German fellow. I told him what I wanted to do. He said, go to Prince George. They're building lumber mills, sawmills, pulp mills, plywood plants. And so I went to Prince George. Mr. Bus, Greyhound, can still see it 60 years ago, can still see where it stopped. And I had my suitcase, I had 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and I counted my money at least 3 times. Yeah. I had $25.47.
Wow.
And I couldn't speak the language, didn't know soul, didn't have a job. But what I did have is attitude. I've always been a believer, no matter how tough things are, I know tomorrow is going to be better. And I avoid negative attitude. I'm always positive and moving forward and passion. And I give it all that I got, no matter what I do, 125%. Work ethic is another part of me. And apply those, attitude, passion, work ethic, what follows this success. And even in work ethic, even today at nearly 84, I did get my lumber mill, and it's not about hurrah, hurrah, John here, but 10 other different companies, and obviously, and then I'm an author. I'm working on my 5th and 6th books, and all of those kind of things. So I've moved a lot of direction. I have another book here. I can't reach it. I get Scott to find it for me here. It's just laying on the other part because I was going to show you something that I discovered. Scott is just walking in the picture. Thanks. So I arrived here like that and started as a cleanup man and then started working. And then it took me, I was already here for 32 years. And came here in 1965 is nothing, was already quite successful. And everybody said to me, you're so successful. And I didn't feel that way.
Yeah.
I didn't. Until I walked into a store here in Prince George, January 1997. And I know it's well because I picked up a book. The book that I picked up is the one that I will show you. I picked up this book here. I don't know why. Driven to Distraction, written by Dr. Halliwell, MD. And this is the book, and it was about ADHD. Mm-hmm. And I said, oh my God, that's me. And I wrote in the book here, January 1997, now in Dutch, because I was ashamed of it. I thought it was a mental disorder. I wrote there in Dutch. Now I finally know who I am. And so the more I read about it, the more I started realizing that the frequency of occurrence, initially I had never even heard of it, and then reading the book and checking Google a bit, the frequency of occurrence probably 8% or so. But the more I found out about it, I found it was much higher than that. Now, the interesting part about it is Dr. Halliwell, that wrote this book in 1993, I bought it in 1997, read it, changed my life. Now, you are podcast number 329. Podcast number 203, On the Brink, is with Dr. Halliwell.
Cool.
Dr. Halliwell is a medical doctor, ADHD, dyslexia, so have I, and has written 18 books, 5 on distraction, but it changed my life. The other part is with Dr. Halliwell that as we were interacting, and I suggest to the people watching, look at our podcast 203 and follow the conversation I had with Dr. Halliwell. So I suggested, he's the expert, not me, to saying that I believe that the frequency of occurrence is likely closer to 20%. He said, no, John, it's more like 25%.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with him. Now, the other part about it is that I've been quite successful in a lot of areas, very involved in board of directors and organizations of dealing with lots of people in leadership roles. And I have found, and I suggested that to Dr. Halliwell, that of the leaders, successful leaders and entrepreneurs that I've met, I believe that likely 50% of them are ADHD. He said, no, John, probably 75%. And I agree with him. So it changed, that part changed my life. So then, after I read the book, and this was still in, I now then already was 57 years old in 1997. It took me 5 years before I went to my doc that delivered our two daughters, was a personal friend. And I came into his office and he said, hey, John, why are you here? I said, I think I got ADHD. And so we looked at it. Yes, I do. And so from the time that I was 13, and kind of my world went upside down, is that again I failed in the 7th grade and saying, what are we going to do? And I went to the factory as probably the youngest person working there at 13. And then, although I liked it, but everything changed for me from that point forward to the time that I was 62, nearly 50 years. I didn't understand, why was I different? It was ADHD. And so the interesting part about it is that in school I was a very good writer, not a reader, because dyslexia in combination with ADHD, and I was very good at numbers. And that part, and then the other part, attitude, passion, work ethic, when I came here, I was going to build my mill, starting from cleanup man, couldn't speak the language, went to the stage of, within a year and a half, I was a superintendent of one of the largest mills here, and within 2 years, I already owned a piece of another mill, and then within 10 years, I had my own mills and several other mills, and now 10 different companies and all those things. But it was not until that book that it changed my life, and then I became an author in the last 5 years, 6 years. People talk to me and say, you have such an interesting life, you should write a book about it. And I thought about that for a long time. So finally I did. This book, Against All Odds, it took me 80 years to live it, 20 years to think about it, 2 years to write it. Quite successful, actually. And it's still a work in progress. I have to add several sections to this book that I wrote 5-6 years ago, because we are still progressing, even at my age. And then since that time, I've written a number of other books. One of them is this one, ADHD Unlocked. And then a number of other ones. And I'm going to show you one more here, just to get the picture, is that's me, actually. I'm very much in health and fitness, and I'm also the oldest competitive bodybuilder in North America. And I'm training right now for going to the Arnolds. I qualified for the Arnolds once in 2018, again to go to the Arnolds in 2025 when I'm 85. This is a picture of me. And so, because I believe in health, fitness, and obviously it's not about age as a number, but it's quality of life and all the issues relating to it. So I just kind of lay that out, and it makes it interesting in our conversation, because I believe a lot of what I've been sharing with you are the things that you do, and as a project, I'm probably an interesting individual.
Yeah, that was really amazing, and thanks for laying that out that way. And it is. I mean, I think some listeners might be afraid or confused when they get a diagnosis. And it was really beautiful that you were able to say, I now know who I am in 1997, because sometimes when I'm training students, as a faculty member, I train doctoral students, and they're afraid to give feedback or a diagnosis to a client or a patient. And I say, well, sometimes it can be really validating. It could be really helpful for that person to then know who they are. You're not defined by it. You're not just John with ADHD. You're John with everything else that you've done.
And I call it, Peter, a superpower.
That's right.
There is no question in my mind that people say to me, how do you do all the things that you do? You run 10 companies, you're still growing, you're writing books, working on your fifth and sixth one. You do all the podcasting, and you do all the speaking and all the other things. I say, ADHD, that's how I do it. That's what it is,
Yeah, I love that you said that with Dr. Hollowell as well, but about most executives and a lot of successful people have a brain that's unique. In today's world, we talk about neurodiversity. It's a newer term in the medical field, and it's one that I struggle with, because the truth is everyone's neurodiverse, meaning neurologically all of our brains are pretty different. There's structural sort of similarities,
Right.
like everyone has a heart and a kidney and a liver and things of that nature.
Exactly.
But everyone's brain is unique, and I love tapping into the superpower. Being able to say, how do you empower yourself through your neurodiversity?
And that makes it so interesting, because especially in my case, I had no idea about ADHD until 50 years after I left school, and saying, what do we do with this kid? Do we send him to the mentally challenged school, or do we get him a job? And so, so it became very, very important for me to speak about it. I do some presentations about it, but I include it in other presentations that I do about entrepreneurship and all the other things. And, it obviously is interesting. I did one presentation 6 months ago or so, 200, 300 people, and I'm a good presenter. And, and I included a section about ADHD and my experience. And I know by the time I speak about it, that it's always people, when I say, anybody in the room that believes they are and have really not talked about, at least a half a dozen hands go up. And then by the time I'm done, I know at the same time a lot of people say, darn, I wish I had it too. But I know the term neurodiversity was a term that I've never heard about until more recently, and I agree with what we all are to a certain extent. And then, and then in particular, ADHD is becoming more into people speaking about it, recognizing it. I'm not sure the educational system has adjusted to it, although they are all knowledgeable about it. Microdiversity is likely an important direction, saying that if you have people struggling with neurodiversity, ADHD, or other reasons, trauma, and but other reasons there may be, that they focus on a skill set primarily that is important, that has their interest, add the other elements later, is an approach that is being experimented with, but it's still a work in progress at this point, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. It's life is a work in progress.
It is.
That's the beautiful thing about it. I mean, no one's ever got it all figured out. I think
No.
that's the challenge we have in today's world. Is social media makes people believe that others have it figured out, because people will post and sort of posture as though they do, when the reality is, we know that nothing. I mean, what I usually say is nothing that's posted is actually real.
Right. So the thing that was important to me, Peter, is that after I found out, and I started when I was 62, and started to understand it more, and that it was, in my opinion, potentially a superpower that enables me to do things that maybe others are not good at, and combining other skill sets together made me successful, that I then felt I had an obligation to share it with others. Not in terms of, but saying that for 50 years, I went through a difficult period that have could brought me down or pushed me up. And fortunately, because likely of attitude, passion, work ethic, and that being driven to succeed, not for anybody else other than me, was strong enough to push me into the different direction. But I feel now more than ever that I have an obligation to share it with others, more than anything to have it recognized by parents at a younger age and with educators in different forms to recognize, in particular, these particular things, ADHD or trauma or slow learners or those kind of things. And it's indirectly likely exactly what you do, I believe, in regards to mental health and mindfulness and combinations around those things of exploring the individual and but potentially can become liabilities, make it an asset and make them succeed because of it or in spite of it, but because of it more than anything.
Yeah, what I hear you talking about a lot so far today as we're recording is resilience. And so that's what we would look at is how resilient is one. And, resilience is like sort of trying to grab water. You can't really measure it. You don't know what it is. And some of us have it and some of us don't. And it ebbs and it flows. And I think just learning, and some definitions look at the role of adversity to develop resilience. And so, the challenges you had as far as like failing seventh grade three times and then moving here with $25.47. I mean, those are adverse experiences that will definitely foster and build up a resilience.
Yeah. So and that makes it then very, very interesting. The other part is the war years were unique and obviously saw far too much that we should not have seen. PTSD was still is part of my life because of that. And the other part was the inner child, the fear of losing the only parent that we had then, so looking around the world, it makes me wonder, do we better understand neurodiversity, or do we just recognize the term and are still applying it to each and every one in an individual basis? Or so there is no shame about, although there still is to a certain extent, there is still concerns about ADHD and being recognized, and I see that virtually on a daily basis since I'm very vocal about it in my book. I think I'm doing a presentation to a school here with a couple of hundred people, and I know already that a number of them will be have been diagnosed or are in the process of dealing with those things. And to me, that is very, very important to speak about it.
Yeah, well, you said it earlier that you're not sure if the school systems are ready for it, or if they've caught up, especially for ADHD. And I think that was a good point because they probably haven't, because it's still the system's still the same. So you still the child gets there at like 8 o'clock and sits in a classroom and leaves at 3 o'clock, and there's one person up front and there's not always collaboration between. And maybe you have like lunch and a recess in between. So I think that's a good point because the ADHD brain, needs to kind of move around, needs to have some interjection and some room, and so I think that our system has to kind of look to keep improving, and it hasn't changed in really since the beginning of educational system time.
No. Will it though, Peter? And if so, how does that happen? Is that when I was writing this book here, I fly down to central British Columbia, down to Victoria every weekend. So today after this podcast, within an hour or two, I'm flying down to Victoria, spend the weekend, and then Monday morning I come back here to Northern BC where most of my companies are, and I'm being active. So I was sitting on one of those flights, and then I was sitting next to a fellow, and the fellow said to me, I don't know if you remember me, but I'm Tom and Raymer. And I said, I kind of do. He said, I'm a professor, the vice president of academics at the British Columbia Institute of Technology, and you were writing a book. And I said, yeah, he was referring to this book. And I said, yes, I am. I said, I'm actually doing another book, is writing about ADHD. And so he said, that's interesting because we are doing some studies about ADHD and slow learning, or issues relating to neurodiversity issues at the university. And then the plane stopped and he left and I left. And the more I thought about it, by pure coincidence, the following weekend, again, I was flying down there, and he was sitting on 1F, and I was sitting 5 rows back, and I said, Tom, make sure you stop at the gate before you leave, because I have to talk to you. And all the people said, well, what's going on here? So anyway, he stopped, and so we started to talk a little bit more about it. And what he talked about then, I said, I'm writing this book about ADHD, and it's interesting from my perspective. There's lots of books being written about it, but it's my experience. But there is something missing in my book. Is that, okay, interesting, but what do we do now? That part is missing. And so when I talked to you, Tom, it sounded to me you going in a direction that is interesting. And he said what it is micro-certification. Is saying focusing on the skill sets that we want somebody to be taught in, that if it is 2 years that they have to be in a classroom setting or university, whatever it is, and then only 6 months of that we are really spending on the skill sets, we focus on that skill set first and foremost, and the other ones become add-ons that to a certain extent have flexibility with it, but at least we develop the skill sets. That to me made sense. And he wrote in this book a little bit about that. And, but it felt to me that that was recognizing the issue much broader, much wider than we ever thought it was before. Some of it is ADHD, some is it likely because of trauma or issues like that. But at the same time, it was not being recognized, and especially when we are in situations here in Canada, and I believe to a certain extent the US has the same, that skill sets are becoming much more, increasingly more difficult to get access to. Like in all the companies that I have and that I manage and other ones that I know about all have the same issue. Cannot find the skill sets or cannot find the training focused on those skill sets that we require, especially as we go forward with technology in particular, add to that AI if you wish, and all the other things that are a changing environment of the workplace.
Yeah, I mean, that's another area of my life where we do personnel selection. So psychologists are involved in assessment and understanding the evaluation of personality profiles, both from a projective and an objective manner. And that is critical for a company's success. And so there's lots of different arms of companies that utilize that science for personnel selection. Because to your point, it is, there's a shift in the culture, but also there's a science around how you find people that can, fit into certain cultures and then grow other cultures into a way, to optimal levels, whatever the industry may be. I mean, this could be across any industry.
Yeah, and I see that you, an author, and you wrote this book here. I don't know if you have a copy of it close to you there, but, so the book is Mindfulness Workbook for Beginners, and then likely other documents that you are writing or being part of, in particular in those areas. Maybe share with us what what this involves and what brought you to writing this book about it.
Yeah. I don't have anything around me. That's my Zen training. In the world of Zen and meditation, we really just relinquish any identities or any accomplishments. Because the goal is just to be, and which is such a hard thing for high performers because we are constantly judged, and all we do is evaluate how well we're doing. But the world of Zen, and that's the mindfulness. That's where that book comes in.
Yeah.
Mindfulness is this really umbrella term about living in a non-judgmental, intentional manner. So I do so in the present moment without judgment. It's one of the most challenging things because the brain is meant to judge. It's what keeps us safe. But to be able to train one's brain means that I'm able to then kind of create, that's neuroplasticity, right? So we've talked about neurodiversity so far. Neuroplasticity means that my brain can shift, it changes, it evolves, which is such a beautiful thing. So this book, the mindfulness workbook for beginners, is it just allows people to access how to integrate that into one's life, whether you're staying at home raising a family, a CEO running multiple companies, or one of the top athletes in your industry. This book allows for you to build that into your life so that you can live in a more peaceful, less suffering manner.
Okay, give me an example of that. Does that mean stressful, not being efficient and effective in the things that I do? But I say a lot of times people can become very effective on being inefficient. So is that part of it in terms of looking at
Yeah.
yourself? How effective am I? Uh,
Yeah, it's
eliminate.
actually it's almost the opposite. You almost don't want to look how effective you are. You want to, because what we do is we look at process, not outcome. And
Okay,
again, that's really hard for high performers. So process is, I get up, I put my pants on, I meditate, I exercise, whatever it
right,
is I do, that's my process. I'm not
right.
going to say I exercise great today or I
No,
had a wonderful meditation session.
no,
It's just you go through the process, because a lot of life. So in the world of sports, most sports are set up for failure, right?
right.
Like if it's right now we're in the US, like baseball kind of finals. Most people know, and your listeners will know, like a batting average of 300 is a pretty good batting average. Like you're going to get it renewed in your contract. That
Exactly,
means you're getting hits 3 out of 10 times. So you're not hitting the ball 7 times out of 10.
exactly.
And so if you're gauging that as far as like outcome, you're going to suffer. And so trying to look at things in a non-judgmental way is a real challenging thing for all brains to do. And so mindfulness allows to build a little bit stronger muscle around, the ability to actually do that.
Yeah, so that is being, the if I think about sports, either you won or you lost,
Yeah,
right? So the going beyond that, and to the same, it could well be the same in business. If you're not
that's right.
succeeding, then so you didn't do a good job, and you were not able. You were not. So a lot of negative open doors there, rather than learning from it.
Yes.
So what the way I look at things is, from the time I came off the bus with my $25.47, I had a goal and an objective. I had a foundation, though,
Yeah.
that was attitude, passion, work ethic. What follows is success. Simple.
Yeah.
That's
Yes.
me. And
Yeah.
and then if you stay the course and be prepared to go through the ups and downs, some of them, if it is sports, business, or personal lives, because we go through all of that, then it becomes a question of developing the skill sets, how to manage those challenging periods in particular.
Yeah, I mean, life is full of that. I mean, that's where the Zen part comes in. I mean, it's non-denominational, a practice of mindfulness, so really any religion, can integrate that into their life. In fact, I that's multicultural, and I love to do that. So I might have, somebody who practices Islam and build mindfulness into your practice of Islam or Judaism or whatever it is. Yeah, so you just want to come to a place where you say, Zen has said, all life is suffering. Everybody suffers, and if you think about that, all listeners can think. I mean, there's not a person we don't know in our life that hasn't had some suffering, right? Obviously, and and trying to compare suffering is really not productive, because some people will then say, well, I suffered more than you, or my
Yeah.
things of that nature, right? Versus we all do suffer. And so what we have to do is then try and find practices to eliminate the suffering, and some of that can be done through practice. In the Zen world, we call it the eightfold path, and there's ways that you can have right mindfulness, right intention, right action, so that this way what you're thinking about what you're doing, so in a
Right.
very simple way, think before you speak.
Right. Now, Zen. So Peter, several times you mentioned Zen.
Yeah.
What does that really mean to a person that is not familiar with Zen? What are you referring to?
Yeah, Zen is one of the schools of Buddhism, and Buddhism is a philosophy of life. And so, I think historically it gets, listed as a religion, but it's a philosophy. It's a way of, so the foundation of Zen and Zen Buddhism comes from Asia. So like from us from the East, and basically there's four kind of foundational beliefs that have built this whole practice. But there's no deities, and there's no kind of formal practice or ideation or idealization in any way, right? There's no, but the four kind of noble truths are that everyone suffers. Suffering is created by attachment, and the only way we have to practice the third is to release attachment, and then the fourth is you then reach enlightenment, which of course none of us ever reach enlightenment. But that, because the human experience is sort of void of that, and so you practice in those, like, first, second, third, or those noble truths, to just say, okay. And the attachment piece is really hard for people, but that's, I think, what I do a lot with the high performers, because the attachment is, I'm attached to my degrees, right, or my accomplishments, or my resume. That attachment is what creates suffering, because it doesn't it takes you out of the present moment. And so to be able to make contact with the present moment in a full way is a challenge for most people, but it's one of the most powerful things that we can do to live, most fully, and then ultimately this with peace.
Right.
And so to live fully with peace is ultimately this goal of Zen Buddhism.
So in my simple life, what I believe is to. It took me a long time to know who am I. And then once I did, that was partially because of the book. The other part was I was not a good communicator, and right up to 1990, when I was already very successful in business, I could not really interact outside of my environment, maybe 3 or 4 people together, but not beyond that. And there was something else that changed my life. The number was the war years, for one, for certain, going to Canada, and then the ADHD. But the other element was that I didn't have the self-confidence, likely, as one. And so somebody dragged me, not physically, but more or less, said, I want you to go with me to Toastmasters. And I said, what's that all about? He said, it's about communication skills. And I said, is anybody going to ask me questions? He said, no. Okay, so I went down there, and then halfway through the meeting, somebody said, hey, John, tell us all about you. And I said, oh my God, I'll never go back here. But I did. I stayed there for 10 years. And for people watching us from around the world, Toastmasters is probably around North America, there is probably 500,000 people involved in Toastmaster clubs. We have some here. I'm sure they have it in your region and area, several of them. And it's smaller groups where people learn communication skills. And so a lot of people, and so I came to the level of a distinguished Toastmaster. That's the highest level. And of the 10 million people that became Toastmasters, less than 1% have gone to that level, or only felt they. Some people have more of a requirement than others. For me, I've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of people that joined Toastmaster, that I have never seen anybody as reluctant and as fearful as me. I could have crawled out of there,
Mm.
physically on hands and knees, to just get away from it. But I stayed, and it changed my life. And so that, in combination with the other ones, became me and saying, who am I? And then the other one is finding peace with who you are.
Yes.
And from my perspective, and it opened the door for me in terms of, then I already was successful in business, but it pushed me even further and able to unlock the ability. I've always was a good writer, started writing, started becoming more an in-demand speaker, and then obviously subsequently podcasting, which is such an amazing media, and only now emerging as much broader, much further in, say, here we have the interaction between you and myself, Peter. Me sitting in central British Columbia on the west coast of Canada, you sitting on the east coast of the United States, and we are sitting here interacting, but all the while we know our interaction is interesting to a lot of people, that tens of thousands of people around the world are watching us, because by tomorrow, this version, tomorrow is Saturday, so by Monday, this interview between you and me will be going public around the world, and tens of thousands of people will be watching. It's amazing how everything has changed. And coming back to this is that, for me, what changed because of ADHD and knowing about it, becoming a presenter gave me confidence, and then subsequently I felt peace in my life. And a lot of times when I talk to others and saying that, find who you are and find peace in your life. There is only one of you around this world, only one. And to become too preoccupied the way you look, the way you dress, and all the other things, just be you and find that peace. And then, I'm not saying that one does necessarily, but it makes life so much more rewarding. And then the other part is, obviously, I fly around a lot. I'm sure you do as well. And especially in North America, I look out of the window, I say, it's paradise. We are the luckiest people in the world. If I look
Yes.
at Eastern Europe, the Ukraine comes to mind, or the Middle East, or all the other places. You may it Venezuela, Cuba, Russia, may it be China, all those kind of places. We are so lucky where we are and what we are. And this month in particular, tomorrow is an election in BC for the new premier in BC. Soon we will have a federal election, but our elections are boring compared to yours. But we'll find out by November the 5th. We're watching the United States very, very closely. I do a lot of business there. So, but
Yeah.
I'm also writing a book about communications. And that is really my 5th book, which comes out next June. But the foundation for a lot of interaction in my mind, and to find that peace in who are you, is to develop communication skills.
Yeah, communication skills are skills. Any skill. Sometimes I'll have a client that's coming for whatever reason they're coming for, and then they have a challenge in their family, and they'll say, "Well, why do I have to be the one that's being so skillful?" And it's like, "Well, you're here, you're doing the work." And learning skills is something that is a beautiful art of life, and you need skills everywhere, and communications is just one of many.
Yeah, especially in leadership, and it's very, very important to have those skill sets. Coming back to sports and neurodiversity, is that are you? So you've written the one book, or you have done more than this one, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, I actually just did that during COVID, just because I ended up having a little bit more time in my hands, and with COVID, even though I was still working clinically because of the technology we have. I do have another book. It's a mindfulness for anxiety. It's a journal in that way. It's just to help people that are struggling with anxiety. And then, of course, as a researcher, I have a bunch of scholarly articles that nobody wants to read. And nor
Yeah.
should they. But and those, I cover various topics. We just published a paper on, well, in college sports, we have a thing called name, image, and likeness, the legal term. So now college athletes are able to earn money. So that's a changing landscape in the world of college athletics. We wrote a paper on that. We wrote a paper about anti-racism practices in sport. Kind of the multicultural aspects of just how the system of sport tends to be racist, and just trying to find ways to deconstruct some of that, just in a really non-judgmental way. So yeah, and right now a study going on about doing functional MRIs for athletes that had concussions. So looking at traumatic brain injury and how the
Oh,
brain sort of shifts, after it's had that kind of trauma. And so using mindfulness and meditation as a way to help the brain recover, which is, so really cool stuff. We have another study about to go on about using music for the brain, for the aging brain, for things like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. And so, again, it's one of the things you said earlier that I think is helpful for listeners is we really, neurodiversity you mentioned is also a new term. Anything that's around there around neurological functioning is new, because, if you think about the functional MRI machine looks like the early computers. Like it's an entire room to get a picture of the brain or a body part. And that's what computers used to be. Now computers are held in our hand, in our pocket,
iPad.
right?
Yeah.
iPad. So there's a real shift of science that's going to like help us understand. I think about as a kid in the United States watching a cartoon called The Jetsons, and the Jetsons was a cartoon where they were like pressing a button and food was delivered to their house, right? Or and people thought that was so insane. They were
Yeah.
up in space, just in a regular like car. Well, here we are. It's sort of happening.
Yeah, can you imagine, like I was born in 1940 and all the
Yeah,
things that have happened since. I still remember the first television come into our city in
that's
Holland,
right.
and it was
Yep,
snowing, mighty snow, and you could see somebody, and then iPhones, couldn't even imagine. The first one that I had was about that. You've seen it all.
that's right.
So the other part, and that would put us into a whole different podcast, but I'm going to touch on it because I believe it is so critically important at my age in particular. How possibly can somebody at my age keeping up to it? I have
Yeah.
friends in my age that don't even do emails, but I've tried to stay abreast with it. I love podcasting. I love all the things that computers. I have the last iPhone, I think i16 or so, and then the other thing I'm watching is AI, which is the fear of it, all the other things. But the genie is out of the bottle, and it will change
Yeah.
the world as we know it today, in
It
my
will.
mind, and that includes, it will change everything, but managing data in particular is absolutely, totally amazing. And
Yeah.
and again, it's not all that long ago when Stephen Jobs and Bill Gates and the other ones studying in their garages, creating a new world. This one will also change the world again.
Yeah, and whether you like it or not, you could dig your heels in the sand, but the bottom line is it's here. Technology is here, and so just learning to radically accept it and work with it.
Yeah, and that will change things, and that's likely a good thing, so.
Sure. Change is okay. I've heard you talk a lot about that today, and vulnerability is okay. Leaning into those things, and that helps us grow.
So if you look at psychology and all the things that is your foundation in your education, are things changing there in terms of understanding who we are? Do you feel that in general people are becoming more aware of things, or is it always an ongoing process?
I mean, hopefully it's ongoing.
Yeah,
I think obviously the foundation of psychology is still built on Sigmund Freud and some of these early, psychologists, and
right.
so a lot of that stuff is archaic and perhaps not actually founded in in science. I mean, there's not there's not like a scientific method that was used then. This was in the 60s and 70s, in the 50s actually too. Evelyn Hooker. These were people that were just taking one or two cases and making these really strong conclusions. So yeah, I mean, there's certainly an evolution. And as a cognitive behavioral therapist, there's a lot of evidence, random control trials, and research out there that's supporting what we're doing, and that's exciting.
Peter, it was a very, very exciting, interesting, everything about mental health and mindfulness and learning about the approach to that in sports, but in all other areas, so critically important. Do you have a website or something that you can share with our guests from around the world watching us?
Yep, you can find me anywhere, officialdrpete.com. So all the social handles, or officialdrpete.com is the website.
And for all those people watching us from around the world, is that subscribe to our podcast, to Peter's as well as to mine, On the Brink with John A. Brink, and like us, comment on us, share us with others. And again, Peter, thank you very much for being my guest. It was very, very enlightening. And again, thank you very much.
Thank you, John, and happy birthday.
Yeah, thank you very much. Take care.